You're in my seat, and quite frankly, you don't look like you belong in this cabin." Those were the words that ended Alistair Montgomery's career before the plane even left the tarmac. He thought he was barking orders at just another passenger he could bully into submission. He thought his platinum status and his connection to the airline's CEO made him untouchable. He was wrong. The woman he was screaming at wasn't just a passenger. She was Dr. Vivienne Clark, the newly appointed chairwoman of the Federal Aviation Oversight Board, the woman who had the power to ground his private jet, revoke his company's licenses, and as he was about to find out, turn his life into a living hell. This is the story of how arrogance met authority, and karma came collecting with interest. The air inside the first-class cabin of Regal Atlantic Flight 902 to London. Heathrow smelled of expensive leather, chilled champagne, and the specific, pressurized silence that only money can buy. Outside the oval windows, the grey tarmac of JFK International Airport was slick with October rain, but inside, the lighting was warm and gold. Dr. Vivienne Clark adjusted the cuffs of her cream-coloured cashmere sweater and leaned back into seat 1A. She closed her eyes for a moment, savouring the rare stillness. It had been a grueling week in Washington. The hearings had gone late into the night. The confirmation vote had been razor-thin, and the press scrutiny had been relentless. But she had won. As of 48 hours ago, she was the first woman of colour to chair the International Aviation Standards and Oversight Board, IASOB. Her signature now authorized safety protocols for every major carrier crossing the Atlantic. She hadn't flown private, despite the offer from the Department of Transportation. She wanted to see the product. She wanted to feel the service. She wanted to be invisible. She opened her eyes and took a sip of the sparkling water. The flight attendant, a young woman named Sarah with a nervous smile, had placed on her side table. Vivienne picked up her tablet, intending to review the latest fuel efficiency reports before takeoff. That was when the peace shattered. "I'm sorry, but this is ridiculous. Check it again." The voice was loud, braying, and coated in that specific transatlantic accent that screams of boarding schools and summer homes in the Hamptons. Vivienne didn't turn around immediately. She kept her eyes on the screen, scrolling through a PDF. "Sir," as I explained, the gate agent's voice drifted from the entryway, strained and polite. "Seat 1A is occupied. You were assigned 2A. It's the exact same suite configuration." "I don't care about the configuration." The man stomped into the cabin. He was tall, thick around the middle, wearing a bespoke navy suit that cost more than most people's cars. His face was flushed a blotchy red, contrasting with his silver, swept-back hair. This was Alistair Montgomery. Vivienne knew the name, of course. Montgomery Logistics was a mid-sized freight empire that had been bleeding money for 3 quarters. Alistair was the son of the founder, a man known in the business pages for his lavish lifestyle and his plummeting stock price. Alistair stopped right next to Vivienne's suite. He looked down at her, his blue eyes narrowing with instant, visceral disdain. He didn't see the chairwoman of the board. He didn't see a PhD in aeronautical engineering from MIT. He saw a black woman in a sweater, sitting in the seat he had decided was his. "You," Alistair said, snapping his fingers near her face. Vivienne paused. She slowly lowered the tablet, turning her head with agonizing slowness to meet his gaze. Her expression was completely neutral. "Excuse me?" "You're in my seat," Alistair declared, puffing out his chest. He turned to the flight attendant, Sarah, who had rushed over. "Honey, get her moving. I always sit in 1A. It's my lucky seat. I have a merger to close in London, and I'm not doing it from the second row." Sarah looked terrified. She glanced between the furious billionaire and the calm, elegant woman. Mr. Montgomery, I can't move a passenger who has a valid boarding pass. The seat was booked weeks ago." "Booked?" Alistair laughed, a harsh, barking sound. He leaned in closer to Vivian, invading her personal space. "Look, sweetheart, I don't know how you got the upgrade. Employee pass? Affirmative action lottery? Or maybe you're just someone's mistress flying home." The cabin went dead silent. A businessman in 3A lowered his newspaper. A socialite across the aisle gasped softly. Vivian didn't blink. Her heart rate didn't even spike. She had faced down Senate subcommittees. A washed-up shipping heir was nothing. "I purchased this seat, sir," Vivian said, her voice low, smooth, and dangerously calm. "And I suggest you step back. You're crowding me." "I'll crowd whoever I want," Alistair shouted, slamming his hand onto the partition wall of her suite. The thud vibrated through the seat. "I fly this airline 3 times a month. I spend $500,000 a year with Regal Atlantic. Do you know who I am?" "I know you are a man currently creating a disturbance on a federal aircraft," Vivian said. She picked up her water glass, taking a slow sip, her eyes never leaving his. "And I know you are delaying takeoff." Alistair's face turned a darker shade of purple. He turned to the flight attendant. "Get the purser. Get the captain. I want her off. Not just out of the seat. Off the plane. She's being aggressive." Sarah's eyes widened. "Sir, she hasn't done anything. She's threatening me," Alistair lied, his voice echoing off the overhead bins. "I don't feel safe flying with this person sitting in front of me. If she's not off this plane in 5 minutes, I'm calling Harrison." Sarah froze. Everyone at Regal Atlantic knew who Harrison was. Harrison Sterling, the CEO of the airline. Alistair Montgomery was known to golf with him. I'll get the purser," Sarah stammered, backing away. Vivian set her glass down. She watched Alistair with the detached curiosity of a scientist observing a particularly aggressive lab rat. He was digging his own grave with every word, and he had no idea the ground was already crumbling beneath his Italian loafers. "You think you can just sit there?" Alistair sneered, leaning over her again. "You think because the world has gone soft that you can just take whatever you want? This is the real world. Money talks. And you? You look like you're flying on a budget." Vivian smiled. It wasn't a nice smile. It was the smile of a predator who knows the trap has already snapped shut. "Mr. Montgomery," she said softly, "I would recommend you take your assigned seat. For your own sake." "Don't you dare threaten me," he hissed. At that moment, the purser, a stern woman named named Beatrice, arrived with a tablet in hand. She looked professionally exhausted. "Mr. Montgomery," Beatrice said firmly, "we are ready to push back. Please take your seat." "Not until she moves," Alistair pointed a shaking finger at Vivian. "I want 1A. It's a matter of principle now. I won't be disrespected by the help." The help. The word hung in the air like toxic smoke. Vivian finally unbuckled her seatbelt. She stood up. She wasn't tall, but she possessed a posture that made her seem 7 feet high. She smoothed her sweater, picked up her clutch, and looked Beatrice in the eye. "Ma'am," Vivian said to the purser, "I believe this gentleman is refusing to comply with crew instructions. Is that correct?" Beatrice looked at Vivian, then at the belligerent Alistair. "Yes, ma'am, he is." "And," Vivian continued, her voice projecting clearly to the back of the first-class cabin, "he has made a physical threat by striking my seat partition and using derogatory, discriminatory language. Is that also correct?" "Listen to her," Alistair scoffed, throwing his hands up. "Using big words. You're trying to sound smart, but you're just annoying. Beatrice, get her out of here. Here." He reached into his jacket pocket and pulled out a thick money clip. He peeled off 5 $100 bills and threw them onto Vivian's lap. "There, $500. Go sit in economy. Buy yourself some KFC. Just get out of my sight." The bills fluttered down onto Vivian's pristine cream trousers. The silence in the cabin was now absolute. It was the silence of a bomb about to detonate. Vivian looked at the money. Then she looked at Alistair. She didn't brush the bills off. She didn't scream. She simply reached into her pocket and pulled out her phone. "Beatrice," Vivian said, her eyes locking onto the purser. "I am declaring an unsafe cabin environment. I am requesting you contact the captain immediately." Alistair laughed. "You're declaring? Who do you think you are, the Queen of England?" Vivian ignored him. She unlocked her phone and dialed a number. It wasn't 911. It wasn't customer service. It was a direct line to the Federal Air Marshal Service Command Center in Washington, D.C. "Operations, this is Dr. Clark. Authorization code Alpha Zulu 19er. I have a code 3 interference on Regal Flight 902. Stand by." She lowered the phone and looked at Alistair, whose smirk was faltering just a fraction. "You have made a mistake, Mr. Montgomery," she said. "A very expensive one." The atmosphere in the cabin shifted from awkward discomfort to palpable dread. The other passengers sensed that the dynamic had changed, even if they didn't understand why. Alistair Montgomery, however, was too blinded by a lifetime of unchecked privilege to see the cliff edge. "Who did you call?" Alistair demanded, stepping closer. "Your boyfriend? Some ghetto lawyer?" Beatrice, the purser, stepped between them, her hand raised. "Sir, step back. Now." "I will not," Alistair roared. "She's bluffing. Code 3 interference. She's watching too many movies. Look at her. She's probably a diversity hire secretary trying to act tough." He turned to the rest of the cabin, arms spread wide, seeking allies. "Can you believe this? I'm trying to get to London to create jobs, to stimulate the economy, and I'm being held hostage by this affirmative action nightmare." A young man in seat 4F, wearing a hoodie and headphones around his neck, a tech billionaire named Simon, spoke up. "Hey man, sit down. You're being a prick." "Shut up!" Alistair snapped at him. "You stay out of this." He turned back to Vivian. "I'm giving you one last chance. Move, or I will make sure you never fly on this airline again. I'll have you blacklisted. I'll have your name mud in every airport from here to Tokyo. Do you hear me?" Vivian looked at the crisp bills still resting on her lap. With a delicate hand, she picked them up, one by one, stacking them neatly. "You offered me $500, she said, her voice conversational. "Finally," Alistair sneered, reaching for his bag as if the victory was won. "Took you long enough to realize your place. Take the cash and go." Vivian stood fully. She walked over to the flight attendant, Sarah, who was trembling by the galley. Vivian held out the money. "Sarah, please log this as evidence of attempted bribery of a federal official," Vivian said clearly. "Federal official?" Alistair barked a laugh, though it sounded thinner this time. "You? A Fed? Please. What are you? A mail carrier?" At that moment, the cockpit door opened. Captain Jim Miller stepped out. He was a veteran pilot, grey-haired, with the weary authority of a man who had flown through hurricanes. He had his hat in his hand, his expression stern. He had been briefed by Beatrice over the interphone. "What is going on back here?" Captain Miller asked, his voice booming. Alistair immediately switched tactics. He smoothed his suit jacket and put on a reasonable man face, pointing an accusing finger at Vivian. "Captain, thank God, this woman is hysterical. She's refusing to vacate seat 1A, which is historically my seat. She's been threatening me, and she's delaying your flight. I demand you remove her." Captain Miller looked at Alistair. He looked at the money in Sarah's hand. Then he looked at the woman standing calmly by the window. The captain's eyes narrowed. He squinted. Then his eyes went wide. His posture snapped from annoyed pilot to military-grade attention. He recognized her. Not from the news, but from the internal memo that had been circulated to every senior pilot in the country just yesterday. Her photo was on the front page of the regulatory update briefing he had read that morning over coffee. Dr. Vivian Clark, new chairwoman of the IASOB, the woman who had just grounded the entire fleet of a budget carrier last week for maintenance violations. Captain Miller's face went pale. He looked at Alistair Montgomery with an expression of sheer horror. It was the look of a man watching someone juggle hand grenades. "Sir," Captain Miller said, his voice dropping an octave, "you are shouting at Dr. Clark." "Doctor Who cares?" Alistair waved his hand dismissively. "She's a nobody, Captain. Just get her off so we can fly. I have a dinner reservation at the Shard." Vivian stepped forward. She didn't look at the captain. She kept her eyes on Alistair. "Captain Miller," she said, reading his name tag. "This passenger has physically struck the aircraft interior, attempted to bribe a federal officer, and used hate speech to intimidate a passenger. Under U.S. Code Title 49, Section 46503, interference with flight crew members and attendants is a felony." Alistair rolled his eyes. "Oh, listen to the lawyer. Captain, are you going to let her lecture you?" Captain Miller stepped fully into the cabin, towering over Alistair. "Mr. Montgomery, you need to be quiet. Right now." Alistair was taken aback. "Excuse me? I know Harrison Sterling. I will have your wings for this, Miller. I'll have you flying cargo planes to Alaska." "Mr. Montgomery," Captain Miller said through gritted teeth, "the woman you are shouting at is the chairwoman of the Aviation Oversight Board. She is technically my boss's boss's boss. She is the highest-ranking civilian aviation authority in the United States." The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating, and absolute. Alistair blinked. He looked at Vivian. He looked at her simple sweater, her dark skin, her calm demeanor. His brain refused to process the information. It didn't fit his worldview. That's impossible," Alistair stammered. "Her? No, that's a lie. You're lying to protect her." "Show him, Captain," Vivian said softly. Captain Miller nodded. "Dr. Clark, my deepest apologies. I will have law enforcement here immediately." "Law enforcement?" Alistair's voice cracked. "Now hold on. Let's not be hasty. If she is who you say she is, surely we can work this out. Professional courtesy?" Vivian took a step closer to him. The distance between them was less than a foot now. She smelled of sandalwood and steel. "Professional courtesy," Vivian repeated, tasting the words. "You told me to buy KFC with your $500. You called me the help. You questioned my education, my background, and my right to exist in this space." I was stressed," Alistair said, sweat beginning to bead on his forehead. "It's been a long day. I'm a diabetic. Sometimes my sugar gets low and I get cranky. It was a misunderstanding." "It wasn't a misunderstanding," Vivian said. "It was a revelation. You revealed exactly who you are." She turned to the captain. "Captain Miller, I am not comfortable flying with this passenger. I do not believe the safety of the crew or passengers can be guaranteed with his volatile behavior. I am exercising my authority under IASOB Regulation 12B. I want this aircraft deboarded of all non-essential personnel until the threat is removed." "The threat?" Alistair squeaked. "I'm not a terrorist. I'm a platinum flyer." "You are a disruption," Vivian said, "and you are done." Sirens began to wail in the distance, getting louder. Blue and red lights flashed against the rain-streaked windows of the cabin. Alistair looked out the window. 3 Port Authority police cruisers and 2 black SUVs were screeching to a halt right next to the plane on the tarmac. "The SUVs," Alistair whispered. "Who are they?" "Those aren't the police, Mr. Montgomery," Vivian said, checking her watch. "That would be the FBI. I told you, I made a call." Alistair Montgomery's knees actually buckled. He grabbed the seat back, Vivian's seat back, to hold himself up. "You can't do this," he pleaded, his bravado dissolving into pathetic fear. "My father. The press. Think of the scandal." "Oh, I am thinking of the scandal," Vivian said, her eyes cold. "But I don't think the headline will be what you expect." She turned to the rest of the cabin, addressing the stunned audience. "Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for the delay. We will be departing shortly, but first, we need to take out the trash." The jet bridge echoed with the heavy, rhythmic thud of boots. It wasn't the polite clip-clop of airport customer service agents. It was the heavy tread of authority. Inside the cabin, the air was so thick with tension it felt pressurized. Alistair Montgomery was still clinging to the back of Seat 1A, his knuckles white, his breath coming in shallow, ragged gasps. He looked like a man who had woken up in a nightmare and couldn't find the exit. "You're making a mistake," Alistair muttered, his eyes darting between Vivian and the open cabin door. "A huge mistake. I'll sue the department. I'll sue the airline. I'll sue you personally." Vivian didn't answer. She simply sat back down in seat 1A, crossed her legs, and picked up her tablet. The ultimate dismissal. 2 uniformed Port Authority officers entered first, creating a corridor. Then, a man in a sharp charcoal suit walked in. He didn't look like a beat cop. He had the hard, weary eyes of a federal agent who had seen everything from bomb threats to hijackings. "Special Agent Ross, FBI Joint Terrorism Task Force," he announced, flashing a badge that caught the cabin lights. He scanned the room, ignoring Alistair entirely, and looked straight at Vivian. "Dr. Clark, are you all right, Ma'am?" "I am uninjured, Agent Ross," Vivian said calmly, "but I have been threatened, harassed, and this individual attempted to bribe a federal official in the performance of her duties." Agent Ross turned his gaze to Alistair. It was a look devoid of sympathy. "Sir, step away from the seat. Put your hands where I can see them." "Now look here, Agent," Alistair tried to summon his boardroom voice, straightening his tie. "This is a misunderstanding between 2 passengers. A civil dispute. You have no jurisdiction here. I am Alistair Montgomery, CEO of Montgomery Logistics, and I demand, you are on a federally regulated aircraft in a secure area of an international airport." Ross cut him off, his voice like grinding gravel. "That makes this my jurisdiction, and you are currently interfering with the operation of a commercial flight. Step away from the seat." Alistair hesitated. For a split second, his arrogance warred with his survival instinct. He looked at Vivian, hoping for a crack in her armor, a sign that she would relent if he just intimidated her enough. She didn't look up from her tablet. "I will not be treated like a criminal," Alistair shouted, flinging his hand out. "She's the one who escalated this. She's the one who—" Agent Ross nodded to the uniformed officers. "Take him." The move was sudden and violent in its efficiency. The 2 officers grabbed Alistair's arms. When he tried to jerk away, they spun him around and slammed him face first into the bulkhead wall next to the galley. Thud. "Ow! You're hurting me! My shoulder!" Alistair screamed, the sound tearing through the refined atmosphere of first class. "Alistair Montgomery, you are under arrest for interference with a flight crew, disorderly conduct, and attempted bribery of a federal official." Ross recited the rights, his voice bored and practiced. The metallic click-click of handcuffs ratcheting tight silenced Alistair's protests for a heartbeat. As they dragged him backward down the aisle, Alistair began to kick and writhe. "This is insanity. Do you know how much tax I pay? I pay your salary. Harrison, call Harrison Sterling. Tell him his best customer is being assaulted." The procession passed row 4. Simon, the young tech billionaire in the hoodie, was holding his phone up, the camera lens steady. As Alistair was dragged past, he locked eyes with Simon. You saw it? You saw her provoke me. Tell them." Simon lowered his phone slightly, a smirk playing on his lips. "Actually, dude, I just streamed the whole thing to Twitch and Twitter. You're trending. Seat 1 A Racist is the #1 topic in New York right now. 3.2 million views and climbing." Alistair's face went slack. The blood drained from his cheeks so fast it looked like he might faint. "What?" "You're famous," Simon said, "but not in the way you wanted. Say hi to the internet." Alistair stared at the camera lens, his mouth opening and closing like a fish on dry land. The reality of the digital age crashed down on him. It wasn't just the passengers, it wasn't just the police. The world had watched him call the chairwoman of the Aviation board the help. "Get that camera out of my face!" Alistair lunged, but the officers yanked him back. "Keep moving!" the officer barked. They hauled him out of the plane, his expensive Italian loafers dragging across the carpet, leaving scuff marks that would be cleaned up before they even reached cruising altitude. As the noise of the struggle faded into the jet bridge, silence returned to the cabin. It was a heavy, stunned silence. Captain Miller stood at the front of the cabin. He looked at his crew. He looked at the passengers. Then he looked at Vivian. "Dr. Clark," the captain said, his voice respectful but shaken. On behalf of Regal Atlantic, I apologize profusely. We had no idea." Vivian finally looked up. Her eyes were tired, but kind. "It wasn't your fault, Captain," she said. "You followed protocol. But let this be a lesson. Protocol exists to protect everyone, not just the people in the expensive seats." "Yes, ma'am," Captain Miller nodded. "We need to offload his luggage. It will take about 15 minutes. Then we'll be underway." "Take your time, Captain," Vivian said, going back to her report. "I'm not going anywhere." As the captain retreated to the cockpit, Sarah, the young flight attendant, approached Vivian's seat. She was holding a fresh glass of champagne, her hand trembling slightly. "Dr. Clark," she whispered. Vivian looked up and smiled. "Yes, Sarah." I'm so sorry I didn't stop him sooner," Sarah said, tears welling in her eyes. "I felt so helpless. I thought if I just appeased him, he would stop." Vivian took the champagne. She reached out and gently touched the young woman's arm. "Sarah, bullies like that rely on our silence," Vivian said softly. "They rely on us wanting to keep the peace. You did your best. But next time, when someone tells you who they are, believe them the first time, and don't be afraid to call the captain." "I won't," Sarah promised, wiping her eyes. "Thank you." "Now," Vivian said, taking a sip of the champagne, "I believe we have a flight to catch, and I have a feeling the Wi-Fi is going to be very interesting on this trip." 2 hours later, Regal Atlantic Flight 902 was cruising at 38,000 feet over the dark, churning Atlantic Ocean. The cabin was dim. The passengers settled into the soft hum of the engines. In Seat 1A, Vivian Clark wasn't sleeping. She had connected to the onboard Wi-Fi. Her inbox was exploding. Subject: urgent, press inquiry. CNN, subject: are you okay? Saw the video. Dad. Subject: official statement draft. IASOB press office. She ignored the press. She opened the email from her deputy director in Washington. Vivian, video is everywhere. The White House just called. The president wants to know if you want to issue a statement or if he should. Also regarding the target in London, it gets better. Check the attachment. Vivienne opened the attachment. It was a corporate ownership structure dossier. She had travelled to London, ostensibly for a conference on sustainable aviation fuels, but her real mission was a quiet investigation into a shell company called Aerologistics Global that had been bypassing safety inspections on cargo flights for 3 years. She scrolled down the document. Parent company, Montgomery Holdings. CIO, Alistair Montgomery. Vivian sat back, a cold smile touching her lips. Karma wasn't just hitting back, it was precision-guided. Alistair hadn't just insulted a random woman. He had insulted the one woman who was actively building a case to dismantle his illegal shipping empire. By getting himself arrested, he had just given her probable cause to seize his personal electronics, which were currently in the custody of the FBI back at JFK. "Checkmate," she whispered to the window. Meanwhile, 38,000 feet below and several thousand miles behind, the atmosphere was far less luxurious. Alistair Montgomery was sitting on a cold metal bench in a holding cell at the Port Authority police station at JFK. They had taken his belt, they had taken his shoelaces, they had taken his phone. His bespoke suit was wrinkled, stained with sweat and the dirt of the floor he had been pinned to. The fluorescent lights buzzed with a headache-inducing hum. "Guard!" Alistair yelled for the 10th time. "I get a phone call. It is my constitutional right." A heavy-set officer walked by, barely glancing at him. "You got your call, buddy. You called your lawyer. He said he's coming. Sit tight." "He's been coming for an hour," Alistair raged. "Do you know who my father is? Arthur Montgomery. He built half this airport." "Arthur Montgomery died 4 years ago," the officer said dryly. "And from what I see on the news, he'd be pretty ashamed of you right now." "The news?" Alistair froze. "What about the news?" The officer stopped. He pulled his personal cell phone out of his pocket and tapped the screen. He held it up to the bars. "You're the main character on Twitter, pal. Look." Alistair squinted. It was the video. The angle was from seat 4F. It showed him purple-faced, screaming, throwing the money at Vivian. The audio was crystal clear. "Go sit in economy. Buy yourself some KFC." But it was the comments that made Alistair's stomach drop. "Flyboy. This guy is trash. Cancel Montgomery Logistics." "Oh, this is legal. That's a felony. 20 years max sentence. Bye-bye, billionaire." Source Regal Atlantic official. "We are aware of the incident on Flight 902. Regal Atlantic has a zero-tolerance policy for discrimination. Mr. Montgomery has been placed on our lifetime no-fly list, effective immediately." "Lifetime," Alistair whispered. "It gets better," the officer said, swiping the screen. "CNBC is reporting that Montgomery Logistics stock has dropped 14% in after-hours trading. Your board of directors has called an emergency meeting for 8:00 a.m. tomorrow." The officer put the phone away and walked off, chuckling. Alistair sat back on the cold bench. The silence of the cell was terrifying. For 40 years, his money had been a shield. It had silenced complaints, paid off mistresses, and buried lawsuits. But money couldn't scrub the internet. Money couldn't erase a video that had already been seen by millions. The door to the holding area buzzed open. A man in a cheap suit walked in. It wasn't his usual high-powered corporate attorney, Marcus Stone. It was some young associate he didn't recognize. "Who are you?" Alistair demanded, standing up. "Where is Marcus?" The young lawyer looked nervous. He adjusted his glasses. "Mr. Montgomery, Mr. Stone asked me to come down. He has recused himself from your representation." "Recused?" Alistair gripped the bars. I pay his firm $2 million a year. Yes, but the lawyer hesitated. Mr. Stone is also on the board of the NAACP Legal Defense Fund. He said, representing you after that video would be a conflict of interest and a PR suicide. Alistair felt the room spin. So who are you? I'm a public defender, the young man said. The court appointed me because your assets have been temporarily frozen pending a federal investigation into bribery and something about aviation safety violations. Alistair sank to the floor. Safety violations? He mumbled. The young lawyer nodded, looking through a file. Yeah, apparently, the FBI seized your laptop and phone when you were arrested. They handed them over to the Department of Transportation investigators about 20 minutes ago. Something about a woman named Dr. Clark authorizing a warrant. Alistair closed his eyes. He pictured the woman in seat 1A, the calm way she had sipped her water, the way she had told him he was making a mistake. He hadn't just lost his seat. He hadn't just lost his reputation. He had handed the chairwoman of the Aviation Board the keys to his digital vault, the emails about the falsified maintenance records, the bribes to customs officials, the shell companies. It was all on that phone, the phone he had used to call his pilot, the phone that was now in the hands of the very agency he had been defrauding. Alistair Montgomery put his head in his hands, and for the first time in his life, he wept. Not for the people he had hurt, but for the life he had just incinerated, because he couldn't stand to sit in row 2. Back on Flight 902, the cabin lights had been dimmed for the overnight crossing. Vivian closed her laptop. She adjusted her seat into the lie-flat position. The sheets were cool and crisp. Sarah walked by, checking on the passengers. She saw Vivian was still awake. "Can I get you anything else, Dr. Clark?" Sarah whispered. "No, thank you, Sarah." Vivian smiled. "I think I'm going to sleep very well tonight." "We land in London in 4 hours," Sarah said. "I hope you have a productive trip." "Oh, I will," Vivian said, her eyes gleaming in the dark. "The real work hasn't even started yet." She closed her eyes, the gentle hum of the engines lulling her into a peaceful slumber, while 4,000 miles away, Alistair Montgomery watched a cockroach skitter across the floor of his cell, realizing it had more freedom than he did. But the story wasn't over. The internet moves fast, but the law moves with a crushing weight. And when Vivian Clark landed in London, she wasn't just coming for a conference. She was coming for the rest of the board. Heathrow Terminal 5 was bustling with the morning rush, a stark contrast to the quiet, pressurized atmosphere of the first-class cabin. Dr. Vivian Clark walked off the jet bridge, looking impeccable despite the overnight flight. She wore a tailored charcoal blazer, oversized sunglasses, and carried a leather briefcase that contained the fate of Alistair Montgomery's empire. While Alistair was being processed in a Queen's holding cell, Vivian was met at the gate not by a driver, but by 2 agents from Scotland Yard's Serious Fraud Office. Dr. Clark, the lead agent, a tall woman named Detective Inspector Harrow, asked. "We received the data packet from your office in Washington. The Americans move fast." "When safety is at risk, we don't blink," Vivian replied, shaking her hand. "Did you secure the London offices of Montgomery Logistics?" "We did," Harrow confirmed as they walked briskly through the terminal, bypassing the long immigration queues thanks to Vivian's diplomatic credentials. "Raid is ongoing. We found the parallel books. It seems Mr. Montgomery wasn't just cutting maintenance costs, he was falsifying cargo manifests to dodge import tariffs on restricted electronics." Vivian nodded. "He mentioned a merger, a deal he was flying here to close." "Yes," Harrow said, a grim smile appearing. "With Sterling West Freight. The signing was scheduled for noon at the Savoy. I imagine the Sterling West board is currently having a very different kind of meeting." Vivian stopped. "Take me there." "To the Savoy? If I'm going to ground a fleet, I want to look the new buyers in the eye and tell them exactly what they were about to purchase," Vivian said. "It's a professional courtesy." 40 minutes later, Vivian walked into the river room at the Savoy Hotel. The room was set up for a celebration: champagne on ice, silver platters of pastries, and a banner reading Montgomery plus Sterling, the future of freight. The mood, however, was funereal. Around a mahogany table sat 6 men in grey suits, looking as if they had just swallowed sour milk. At the head of the table was Sir Richard Sterling, a man known for his integrity and his short temper. When the doors opened and Vivian walked in, flanked by 2 British detectives, the room went silent. "Gentlemen," Vivian said, her voice echoing in the high-ceilinged room. Sir Richard stood up. "Dr. Clark, the American regulator? We saw the news. The video is appalling." "The video is the least of your problems, Sir Richard," Vivian said, placing her briefcase on the table. She opened it and slid a single file folder across the polished wood. "What is this?" Sir Richard asked. "Evidence," Vivian stated. "Retrieved from Alistair Montgomery's personal device and cross-referenced with the servers we just seized in his London office. Montgomery Logistics hasn't performed a Stage 4 engine overhaul on their 767 fleet in 5 years. They are flying ticking time bombs. If you sign this merger, you aren't buying a company. You are buying a corporate manslaughter charge waiting to happen." Sir Richard opened the file. His eyes scanned the pages, the faked inspection logs, the bribes paid to inspectors in Miami, the emails from Alistair explicitly mocking the safety regulations. Email from A. Montgomery to VP of Ops. Just paint over the rust. If the regulator asks, tell them the paperwork is in processing. I'm not spending $200K on a new turbine when the old one spins just fine. Sir Richard turned a shade of pale, usually reserved for ghosts. He looked up at his legal team. "Is this verified?" "By the FBI and the ISOB, Vivian said. "And as of this morning, I have revoked Montgomery Logistics' operating certificate in US airspace. Their planes are grounded. Effectively, the company you are trying to buy is now worth 0. Sir Richard closed the folder. He dropped it on the table like it was radioactive. "Get the press on the phone," Sir Richard barked at his aide. "Cancel the deal, retract the offer, and draft a statement distancing us from Montgomery. I want to be clear that we had no knowledge of these practices." He turned to Vivian. He didn't look angry. He looked relieved. He extended a hand. "Dr. Clark, you just saved me £2 billion. "I didn't do it for your money, Sir Richard," Vivian said, shaking his hand firmly. "I did it because I fly on those planes. My family flies on planes. And I don't let men like Alistair Montgomery gamble with our lives to save a few dollars." She turned to leave. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a conference to attend. I believe the topic is ethics in leadership. I have a new case study to present." 6 months later. The Southern District of New York Federal Court was packed. It was the kind of crowd usually reserved for celebrity divorces or mafia bosses. But today, the defendant was Alistair Montgomery. He looked different. The weight had fallen off him, leaving his skin hanging loosely on his frame. His hair, once perfectly silver and coiffed, was thinning and white. He wore a suit that fit poorly, a public defender's rack suit, not the bespoke armor he was used to. He sat at the defense table, his hands trembling. The prosecution had been ruthless. They had played the video of the airplane incident. They had called Sarah, the flight attendant, who testified through tears about his aggression. They had called Captain Miller. But the final witness was the one everyone was waiting for. The prosecution calls Dr. Vivian Clark. The doors opened. Vivian walked in. She wore a simple navy dress, her head held high. She didn't look at the cameras. She didn't look at the gallery. She walked straight to the witness stand and took the oath. Alistair couldn't look at her. He stared at his hands. The prosecutor, a sharp woman named Ms. Vasquez, walked up to the podium. "Dr. Clark, could you describe the interaction you had with the defendant on October 14th? Vivian recounted the story. She spoke clearly, without embellishment. She described the insults, the physical intimidation, the bribery attempt. She described the fear she saw in the flight attendant's eyes. "And Dr. Clark," Ms. Vasquez asked, "did the defendant know who you were?" "No," Vivian said. "He assumed, based on my appearance, that I was not someone of consequence. He assumed I was there to be moved. And when he offered you the money, the $500, what did that signal to you?" Vivian looked directly at Alistair. For the first time, he looked up. His eyes were red-rimmed, filled with a mix of hatred and pathetic pleading. "It signaled that he believed everything has a price," Vivian said. "He believed that dignity can be bought. He believed that rules are for poor people." "Thank you, Dr. Clark." Then came the cross-examination. Alistair's court-appointed lawyer stood up. He had a hopeless job, and he knew it. "Dr. Clark," the lawyer began tentatively, "Mr. Montgomery was under significant stress that day. His company was failing. He is a diabetic. Is it possible that you misinterpreted his panic for aggression?" Vivian leaned into the microphone. The courtroom went silent. "Counselor," she said, "I am an engineer. I deal in stress tolerances. When a metal strut is under stress, it bends. If it is weak, it snaps. Your client didn't snap because of stress. He snapped because, for the first time in his life, he encountered an object that wouldn't move for him. That is not panic. That is entitlement." The lawyer paused. He looked at the jury. They were nodding. He looked at Alistair, who had his head in his hands. "No further questions," the lawyer whispered. The verdict took less than 3 hours. Guilty, on all counts. Interference with flight crew members. Guilty. Attempted bribery of a public official. Guilty. Conspiracy to defraud the United States. Safety violations. Guilty. The judge, a stern man named Judge Reynolds, peered over his glasses at Alistair. "Mr. Montgomery, you have lived a life of extraordinary privilege. You used that privilege not to help others, but to belittle them and endanger them. You treated the sky as your personal playground and the people in it as your servants." "Please, Your Honor," Alistair wept, standing up. "I'm sorry. I lost my company. I lost my home. My wife left me. I have nothing." "You have your life, Mr. Montgomery," the judge said coldly, "which is more than the passengers on your aircraft would have had if Dr. Clark hadn't stopped you." The gavel banged. "I sentence you to 48 months in federal prison, followed by 3 years of supervised release. Furthermore, you are hereby placed on the federal no-fly list for life. You are banned from entering any airport in the United States unless for the purpose of immediate deportation." Alistair screamed as the marshals took him away. It was a primal sound of a man who realized that the world had finally spun on without him. Vivian watched him go. She didn't smile. She didn't cheer. She simply gathered her purse, thanked the prosecutor, and walked out into the sunlight. 3 years later. The Greyhound bus terminal in Newark, New Jersey, was a universe away from the first-class lounge at JFK. If the lounge had been a cathedral of silence and expensive leather, this place was a purgatory of fluorescent flickering and sticky floors. The air here didn't smell of chilled champagne and sandalwood. It hung heavy with the scent of diesel exhaust, stale coffee, industrial disinfectant, and the damp, unmistakable odor of despair. Alistair Montgomery sat on a cracked orange plastic bench, his knees aching from the cold draft, blowing through the automatic doors that refused to close all the way. He clutched a torn plastic bodega bag between his legs. Inside were all the worldly possessions he had left: 2 changes of clothes, a toothbrush, a paperback book he had found in the prison library, and a court order outlining the terms of his supervised release. He had been a free man for 72 hours. But as he looked around the terminal, he realized freedom was a relative term. Alistair was unrecognizable. The man who had once terrified flight crews with a single arched eyebrow was gone. In his place sat a gaunt, hollowed-out figure. He had lost nearly 50 pounds on the federal prison diet. His skin, once flushed with the ruddy complexion of expensive scotch and vacations in St. Bart's, was now sallow and papery. His hair, formerly a thick, silver mane that cost $300 a month to maintain, was thinning, white, and jaggedly cut. He wore a faded navy windbreaker he'd picked up at a Goodwill in Queens and a pair of stiff, ill-fitting jeans. No one in the terminal looked at him twice. To the mothers wrangling, crying toddlers and the tired workers waiting for the commuter lines, he was just another old man down on his luck, part of the invisible furniture of the transit system. Service to Cleveland, Schedule 402, now boarding at Gate 4. A voice crackled over the intercom, the static so loud it made Alistair wince. Have your tickets out. No digital scanning. Paper tickets only. Alistair groaned as he pushed himself up. His joints popped. He was headed to Cleveland to live with his estranged sister, Margaret. She was the only person who had answered his collect calls, and her offer had been brutally specific. He could sleep on the pull-out couch in her basement if he mowed the lawn and stayed out of sight when her bridge club came over. It was a humiliating lifeline, but it was the only one he had. He shuffled toward the line, keeping his head down. He was terrified of being recognized, though he knew it was unlikely. The world had moved on. The Seat 1A video was ancient history in internet years, replaced by new scandals and new villains. As he trudged past a row of vending machines, a flash of blue light caught his peripheral vision. A bank of television screens was mounted high on the wall, tuned to CNN to entertain the waiting passengers. Most were muted, but the center screen had the closed captions rolling. The banner at the bottom of the screen read, "Breaking News. President signs Historical Aviation Safety Act." Alistair stopped. His heart hammered a painful rhythm against his ribs. He looked up. The scene on the screen was the White House Rose Garden. It was a crisp, sunny day in Washington, the kind of day he used to spend on the golf course with senators. The President of the United States stood at the podium, smiling broadly. But Alistair didn't see the President. He saw the woman standing to the President's right, Dr. Vivian Clark. She looked magnificent. She was wearing a cream-colored suit that was eerily reminiscent of the sweater she had worn on that fateful flight 3 years ago. But where he had once seen the help, the rest of the world now saw an icon. She stood with a posture of unshakable grace, her hands clasped on the podium as the President gestured toward her. The volume on the TV was low, barely audible over the din of the terminal, but Alistair strained to hear. Integrity, courage, and an unwavering commitment to the law. The President's voice drifted down. It is my distinct honor to introduce the new Secretary of Transportation, Dr. Vivian Clark. Alistair felt the blood drain from his face. The woman whose career he had tried to crush with $500 and a racial slur was now in charge of every plane, train, and automobile in the country. She wasn't just powerful. She was historic. The camera zoomed in on Vivian. She leaned into the microphone, her expression serious but kind. "Thank you, Mr. President," she said. Alistair could remember the sound of that voice. He remembered how calm it had been when she told him he was making a mistake. This Safety Act isn't just about regulations or maintenance schedules. It is about a fundamental promise. The promise that when we travel, we are all equal in the eyes of the law. Safety is not a luxury product. Dignity is not an upgrade. The sky belongs to everyone. The crowd on the screen erupted in applause. Alistair stood frozen in the middle of the gritty terminal. The irony was so sharp, it felt like a physical blow. By trying to humiliate her, he had given her the platform to destroy him. By trying to save time on engine maintenance, he had accelerated her rise to the highest office in the land. He had created his own destroyer. "Hey, Pops, you moving or are you going to stare at the TV all day?" The harsh voice snapped Alistair back to the present. He flinched, turning around. The bus driver, a burly man with a thick beard and a stain on his uniform shirt, was glaring at him from the gate door. "The line is moving," the driver barked, pointing a thick finger at the bus. "You're holding up the schedule." I'm sorry," Alistair stammered, his voice raspy from disuse. He fumbled in his pocket for the crumpled paper ticket. His hands shook as he handed it over. The driver snatched the ticket, ripped the stub, and shoved it back at him. He didn't say, "Welcome aboard." He didn't offer a hot towel. "Row 34, the driver grunted, checking his manifest. "Window seat, all the way in the back, next to the toilet. Move it." Row 34. Alistair stepped onto the bus. The air inside was stiflingly hot and smelled of bodies and corn chips. He walked down the narrow aisle, his hips bumping against the shoulders of other passengers who didn't bother to move. He apologized, but no one answered. He was invisible again. He reached the back of the bus. Row 34 was a cramped nightmare. The seat was hard fabric, stained with years of use. The door to the tiny chemical lavatory was right next to his head, emitting a sharp, blue fluid stench every time the bus idled. There was no legroom. Alistair wedged himself into the corner, his knees pressing painfully against the hard plastic of the seat in front of him. A teenager in the aisle seat had headphones on and was chewing gum loudly, oblivious to Alistair's existence. The bus engine roared to life with a shudder that vibrated through Alistair's spine. As the vehicle lurched forward, pulling out of the dark, covered bay and into the sunlight of the New Jersey Turnpike, Alistair turned his head to the window. It was streaked with grime and road salt. He looked up. High above the highway, cutting through the pristine blue canvas of the sky, a silver jet was climbing. It was a Regal Atlantic 767, banking east toward London. He watched the white contrail bloom behind it, a symbol of a world he used to own, a world where the champagne was cold and the seats reclined. The plane soared higher, free and untouchable, carrying the new chairwoman of the board toward the future. Alistair watched until the plane was just a speck, disappearing into the clouds. He let out a long, shuddering breath, leaned his head against the vibrating, dirty glass, and closed his eyes. "Ticket checked," he whispered to himself. The bus merged into traffic, carrying him anonymously into the rest of his life. And that, my friends, is the story of Alistair Montgomery and Dr. Vivian Clark. It's a reminder that true power doesn't scream, it doesn't bully, and it certainly doesn't need to steal a seat to prove its worth. True power is competence, dignity, and the quiet confidence of knowing exactly who you are. Alistair thought his money made him untouchable, but he learned the hard way that in the altitude of life, character is the only currency that matters. He lost his fortune, his freedom, and his pride, because he couldn't show basic human decency. So the next time you're on a plane, or anywhere really, remember this story. Be kind, be respectful, because you never know if the person you're talking to is the one who holds the keys to your future. If you enjoyed this story of instant karma and justice served, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel. Subscribe and hit the notification bell so you don't miss our next story about entitled people getting exactly what they deserve. And tell me in the comments, what would you have done if you were in SEAT 1A? I'll see you in the next video.